So welcome to session. My name is Fran Stovold and I'm the Workforce Development Lead for Sporting Heritage. So I run all our webinar programme and our conference and our networks. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Joe Boardman. Joe, do you want to introduce yourself just quickly?
Yep. So I'm Joe. I am the Business Development Lead for Sporting Heritage. So do everything from fundraising, income diversification, sponsorship. So anything to do with money and developing new business for the subject specialist network that Sporting Heritage is.
So because we're a slightly smaller group, some of this is not necessarily as applicable. So we've sort of all introduced ourselves already. And actually, because we're a smaller group, you can put yourself on mute or you can jump in whenever you want to chat. As I say, it's going to be quite an interactive session. And as you know, we are recording it. So if there's at any point you would like to turn your cameras off, feel free to. There are closed captions enabled for the session, which you can toggle on and off at your end using your Zoom controls if you would like them. If we have any tech difficulties as we're going through, so for example, if the internet drops out at your end, if you just log back in using the same link and I'll let you back in from the waiting room. If for any reason something happens at our end and this whole session goes down, I will contact you and let you know if we get ourselves up and running within the same time frame or whether we're looking to reschedule. But hopefully everything should run smoothly. So we've done the welcome and the housekeeping. So we'll just run through some session objectives in a moment. We've done a little bit of the introductions and the one thing already. And then the main meat of today's session is looking at how to really write a really tight, confident, successful funding bid. As you know, there's no guarantee of success. It's all about meeting those criteria and just thinking about who else you might be up against when you go to panel for the different funders. But hopefully we'll run through enough top tips and look at some of the forms in more detail and the funding criteria just to boost confidence and give you a few sort of top tips and skills to practice with. So hopefully by the end of today's session, you'll have a better understanding of what you need to have in place before you apply for funding, how to identify the funders and the projects and sort of activity that you want to do. And I know that a couple of you already have ideas about where you want to go. And yeah, top tips to help refine your fundraising skills. So I think we'll jump over that because we've sort of done our introductions already while we were waiting. So Joe, I think I'm going to hand over to you to start with doing your research.
Right. So the first thing really when you're looking at it, and when you're looking at funding applications, and I know it's easy to just see a funder that's launched something with a really tight deadline and to go for it. But one thing that I would say is when you're looking at doing any funding application is looking at doing the research. I mean, especially in this day and age, you know, as Fran said, your applications need to be as good as they can be. So you need to make sure you've done your research and that you've dotted your I's and crossed your T's. I think the pandemic changed the funding landscape and changed applying for funding because we had emergency funding, we had recovery funding, and it was given out for different things. But the problem that we've got is we've had 2 years of that. So we've had 2 years of projects that were good to go to funders sat on hold. So as soon as the funders opened their open programs again, it was like the floodgates and everybody was putting applications in. And so the competition was even fiercer than it was before. So this is really important, even more so now. So I talk about research, and find, filter, focus and follow. And you'll understand, it'll become clear, I promise, a bit later on. So we're going to talk about, on your research, money versus mission, the case for support, which funder should you be looking for, timing and developing that relationship. Okay, next slide, Fran. There we go. So money versus mission. As I said earlier, sometimes when we're looking for funding, we see something that comes out, we'll just go for it. And what we won't look at is whether that funding aligns with your mission, your vision, your values. Is it going to help you achieve your objectives? You literally just see it and you want to go for it. And I think, you know, what we need to think about is making sure that we don't do that, because if we do that, and especially if you are part of a charitable organisation or even a social enterprise, and even with some of the stuff that you're doing, Harry, I don't know if you're part of a larger organisation or if you're just a sole trader, what you want to do when you're going for a funder is making sure that it aligns with what it is that you want to do. And that when you get the money, you're going to be able to achieve the outputs and the outcomes because it fits exactly in with what it is that you want to do. So you need to make sure that it does align with your mission, because otherwise you get, they call it mission drift, which is basically, it moves you away from what you were originally set up for. So you have to think about that when you're looking at the funders, and sometimes you have to say no. And I know it's really difficult when the money's there and you can see it. It's like, do you know what? I'm not going to go for that because it doesn't fit with what it is that we need to do. So we need to be able to find something that will. And in addition to that, you've also got to think about whether you as an organisation or as an individual are going to fit their criteria, because some funders will only fund certain legal structures and certain governance structures. So, you know, for example, if you are a sole trader, then things like developing your creative practice is great from Arts Council, but you might not get funded from a charitable foundation or trust because you're a sole trader. If you're a social enterprise, a lot of the traditional trusts and foundations won't fund social enterprises. By social enterprise, I mean a structure like a community interest company. If you're interested in legal structures, we have information on Sporting Heritage website. There's a toolkit there that will provide you with information about different legal structures and what they mean and what it is that you can and can't do. And I'm sure Fran is going to be looking now at a link to send you to put up for the toolkit there. The other thing that you need to think about is the size of your organisation. Some funders, and again, this links with you, Sarah, when you think about Age UK, some funders won't fund huge organisations, they only want to fund small organisations. So you then have to justify that, yes, you might be part of a bigger organisation like Age UK, but actually you're an independent charity based in a local area that doesn't have the same turnover as your national partner. So it's thinking about those things as well. And that includes turnover as well. For example, People's Postcode Trust, they've upped the amount that you can apply for, but they like to fund smaller organisations. And I know this sounds a lot, less than 500,000 a year. But some charities and trusts do define the certain turnover level. So again, it comes back to make sure that you read the guidance when you're looking at that funding. And then also making sure that, you know, you want the funder to align to your vision and mission, but also that you align to their strategy and objectives and principles. Because if you don't, then why are you going for that funding part if it doesn't gel with what you do? The next thing is making sure that you're able to manage the money. I always say the easiest thing is getting the money, the hardest thing is managing it, because dependent on their monitoring requirements, you will have to send them regular reports to make sure that you're doing what you said you were going to do and that you were achieving what they want you to achieve and what was in your application when you sent it in. So it's making sure that you can achieve the outputs and the outcomes you require. Don't over-egg your outputs and outcomes. So many funders, and you'll see it in the top tips later on, say to you, don't over-egg, because if you can't achieve it, you'll have to keep going back to them and explaining why you can't achieve it. So be realistic and be practical. And that also then leads on to making sure that you've got the right number of people to help you effectively manage that project, whether it's volunteers, staff, or both. It's making sure that you've got the resource to be able to do that. Next slide, please.
Before we jump on, Harry, did you want to say something?
Oh, sorry, Harry.
Yeah, that's okay. Yes, thank you, Fran. Yeah, two things. I'm established as a limited company, in effect. So it's just me running the show. However, I'm based in Cornwall, and I operate in Cornwall and Devon primarily. And I've got lots of links with other organizations within Cornwall with whom I want to collaborate as a way of actually publicizing, getting an audience, getting things out there, because, you know, collaboration is key for me in this project.
And I will say as well, collaboration is key for the funders, Harry. So that is exactly what they will be looking for, even more so now than ever before. What they want to do is, everybody wants a bigger bang for the buck. Everybody wants more added value for their money. So if you're working with another organisation, they will then see that as spreading their money across 2 different organisations, which means they get double whammy for the work that you're doing. So they will look very favourably on collaboration and partnerships. Yeah, definitely.
And there are different ways of doing it, aren't there, Joe? So you you can go in for an application. So you do it as a joint application. So it's a full on, you know, it's a partnership in all senses of the word. Or you can have, you know, supporting organizations that come in. So you might go in as the lead organization, as your limited company, and then have a network of people who are going to support the project. And you can even have people supporting in different ways. So for example, if you're talking about, you know, getting your message out there, you may have, this is sort of me making assumptions about your project, but you may have a network of organizations where you're going to exhibit work.
I'll tell you, sorry to interrupt, but I'll tell you, Fran, in my case, it's actually, because I'm a landscape photographer, my project is on the landscape, it's looking at ancient monuments, Neolithic and Bronze Age monuments. And I'm actually working with an archaeologist, an archaeoastronomer, a geologist. I'm looking at dance and performance and music. So I'm working with none of which are my specialism. So I'm looking at all these specialisms, drawing people in who can actually collaborate and build and literally make something, a collaborative project.
Yeah, sounds really good. The one thing that I would say to you, Harry, and I'm sure you have looked at this, is if you're a limited company and you're the only person, you're the only director, check when you're applying for funding that you're an eligible company. Because and I know Arts Council do, they will, but when you're looking at funders, some of the funders, when it's limited companies, will be looking at that board of directors of unrelated people, but they'll be wanting more than one. So make sure that your legal structure is eligible when you're looking at the funding. And if not, that's when what Fran said earlier about doing something jointly, or having somebody else as lead but subcontracting or subcommissioning you to do specific pieces will work. But just check that out and just be mindful of that as well. Because even though you're working with all those different partners, some of the lottery funders, I will say, and I'm not going to say anything more, but some of the lottery funders will be very specific about that, what they will fund legally.
Of course. Good, thank you.
Okay, yeah. So the next one is really, really important. And it's actually important as well if you're doing like fundraising strategies. Is if you're going to a funder, then you're going to be looking at either a project, a program, an activity, or, you know, something that you know there's a need for. So what I would suggest you do as part and parcel of that is develop a case for support. And a case for support really is a document that will clearly explain why you need the funding and what you plan to do for it. Because most of the applications that you apply for will have those questions, you know, where's the evidence of need? How much money do you want? What are you going to do? What are your outputs? What are your outcomes? How do you know there's a need? So if you've got your case for support document already made out and done, and if you want, we've got a template, so you can have our template and use that, then you can answer those questions because you've already done that research, that background work. And I think, you know, a case for support can be different for a different organisation. You can even do one for your organisation about, you know, why your organisation's there. But if you're looking at funding for projects, it's really good to help you define down why you want the money and what the money is going to achieve. And I think there, it's the why is really, really important, because you've got to think about why you're doing what you're doing, why is it important, and why should a funder support you? And a case for support is useful for donors as well. So if you're looking at going for donors, not just, you know, funding body and grant making funders, but donors and investors, because they'll ask the question, why are you doing it? You know, what's the point? Why should I care? So it's thinking about those different things really, and then also thinking about what you should have in your case for support. And the first thing is need. So you're going to have to show what the issue or the problem is that you're looking to address. Why is it important? And why that particular area? And bearing in mind, guys, we've got all this information, so we'll be sending it all through to you. So it's all in the notes as well, so you can have all that. Also think about, you know, if nothing was done, would it make a difference? You know, what would happen if nothing was done? And then the solution. So the solution is, what is it that you're going to do to address that need? What would the funds pay for? Which then makes you think about, when you're going to a funder, are you looking at revenue funding, or are you looking at capital funding, or are you looking at both? And when do you want it to happen? Which will bring us into timescale, which I'll talk about as well a little bit later. And who's going to be involved in delivering that? and who's going to benefit from this work, and also then what the key achievements are going to be. And then that leads you on to the impact. So the impact is, how is what you're doing going to change things in either your local geographical community or your demographic community? How is it going to make a difference? And how is, you know, how is your community, how are your community's lives, or your visitors or your audience's lives, going to change or be different as a result of the work that you've done? And then also, how do you know that you've achieved it? So how are you going to monitor it? And how are you going to show the funders that you've done exactly what you said you were going to do? Which then brings you onto the budget. Be realistic about your budget. Don't under-egg. So, for example, if you've got volunteers, don't then think about, oh, we don't need to put staff costs in there. Because if, for example, pandemic's shown us, you know, volunteers, especially if you've got volunteers of a certain age or are vulnerable, then you've lost your workforce because your volunteers can't come. So you then have to pay for people to come in to deliver against your project objectives. So make sure when you're looking at your budget that it's realistic and you identify different key areas of expenditure that you need for the budget. So be quite realistic about that. And then the added value. So that's going back to what we were talking about with Harry there, about things like, you know, are you working with different partners and organisations? What is it that you've got that makes you better than Joe Bloggs down the road? What is it that you've got that provides the funder with a better added value than something else that's coming to them? Have you got a track record with the funder? Have you got past experience? So again, Sarah, thinking about the funding that you've gone for, you've just done a small funding bid, but it's giving you the confidence. You've got a little bit of a track record now, so you can use that and build upon that. And that really is what makes a really good case for support. And the other things, the basic things, again, that, you know, your case for support is easy to understand, so that you can understand it and other people can, that it's specific, so it's relating to a specific project or thing that you wanted to do. You've got the evidence to back up that actually, that, you know, everything that you've done has been validated and it's needed, and that actually, you know, it's concise. None of us like to read War and Peace, so we want something that's really concise, that does exactly what it says on the tin. Next slide, Fran.
I'm going to jump in quickly before we move on, just to say a couple of things. So what I like about picking up on Joe's idea about having your sort of case for support, sort of you have a one sort of sat on the shelf that you can then adjust and amend depending on which funding application you're going for. But I always think when I've worked with organisations and we've put together a case for support, it really highlights sort of evidence to collect, so that when you come to write your funding bid, you're not scrabbling around to find the data and information you need. So you may think, actually, to demonstrate the need, I need to show how many people are using my service, or how many people came to a previous event that was like the one that I've just run. And it's thinking, okay, well, I've got those stats now, but in 6 months' time or a year's time, when I might want to be writing the next funding bid, I might not have them to my finger. You know, they might be not so easy to retrieve. So it's knowing, or just reminding yourself to collect data as you go along, or collect evidence, or collect photographs of activities that are going on, so that you have them, you know, even if you just pop them in a folder on your computer, or a paper copy somewhere, so you've got them, so that when you come to write your next funding bid, they are there so you can demonstrate your need. Yeah. And then I was just thinking about what Joe was talking about, trying to measure the impact or explain what the impact is. It might not be always something physical and tangible. So do think particularly of sort of intangible impact. So will you change people's attitudes? Will you increase their knowledge? Things that they are much harder to demonstrate. But I would imagine, particularly if you're doing your landscape photography and you're bringing together all those different sort of visual arts, Harry, you may have more sort of attitudinal change or knowledge, or, you know, it's much more, you'll get a much more emotional response maybe from your audience. And then it's having the time to think through how you might measure some of that. And some of it can be done through, you know, questionnaires or interviews with people, but it's thinking through some of that in advance so you can refine it before you get to that point where you're like, okay, I've now got a month to write this funding application and I've got to think through all these different things. So it's just thinking through, I suppose, what we might call generic, I don't know if any of you have come across the generic social outcomes. I'll put it in the follow-up leads. There's a framework which we use within sort of museums and heritage, which talks about outcomes and impact. So I'll put some of that information in some of the follow-up, and not all of it might be appropriate for what you're doing, but it might just allow you to think in slightly different ways. And the more that you can demonstrate sort of the need and the impact, the stronger your application will be, and particularly the stronger your approach for support.
Can I say, Fran, yes, you're absolutely bang on target, as a matter of fact, because the project that I'm working on has educational aims, and also it is about changing attitudes, and it is about introducing the countryside to city dwellers in a nutshell.
Yeah, and one of the other things as well, when it's looking at how you measure that impact, you can also use visual and digital stuff now. We've all had to be dragged into the digital age through the pandemic, and what funders are recognizing now is that actually, videos, pictures, things like that, where you can put things up and show, things that you've done and how it's impacted on people. And funders now are starting to recognize the importance of the social outcomes. So that there is at the moment, just to make you aware, nationally at government level, at Department Culture, Media and Sport, DCMS level, they're looking at culture, they're calling it Culture and Heritage Capital. So how engaging with the countryside, heritage sites, arts, culture, working with local communities and doing things like that actually has that positive impact, and they're wanting to try and define it. So it is something now that funders are starting to recognize the importance to be able to gather that information and show it in whatever way, shape or form is a positive for funders moving forward.
Talking of moving forward, should we go on?
Yep. So everything we've talked about in the past 2 slides will inform this. So once you know that a funder aligns with your vision and values, and you align with their strategy and their principles, tick. The fact that you've got your case for support, so you know exactly what you want, you know exactly who you're going to help, you know the need, you know how much budget you want, you know what the time scale is, and you know what the demographic is and the geographical location is, tick, 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 tick. So actually that should then start to help you to find and filter the funders that are available and the funding pots that are available. It makes that huge funnel get slightly less, because you now have information that will make you realize, well, actually we can't go to that funder, we can't go to that funder. So the next thing that you've got to think about is, and again, we've got stuff in the notes here and also in the useful resources at the end, you need to be able to find those funding pots and funders. So there are lots of ways to do that. Sport in Heritage does have, if you remember, it does have a toolkit. It works with an organisation based in West Yorkshire called Community Matters Yorkshire. And you don't have to be based in Yorkshire. They have an absolutely fantastic offer where you pay £10 a year and you get access to a funding database, and you can sign up to their e-shots and find out about the funders that are out there. And I mean, £10 a year is ridiculous amount of money, but it's really useful to help you look at who the funders are, and they update that quite regularly. There are also social media updates. I used lots of social media last year and the year before to find out when funding was coming out, because most funders will post on social media, whether that's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. So if you've got social media and use social media, you can find out about things. If you follow, say, for example, if you're interested in the Arts Council, follow them and follow all their notifications, etc. E-newsletters, quite a lot of organisations will allow you to sign up to their e-newsletters free of charge, so you can get information about funding that's coming out. And then you've got specific organisations that are relevant to arts, culture and heritage, like the Association of Independent Museums, the Heritage Alliance, the Museums Association, National Archives, Collections Trust, the Museum Development Network. And for community groups like yours, Sarah, you'll have your local CVS, Council for Voluntary Service or Voluntary Action, or you'll have local community foundations as well that do lots of small grant pots that may be specific to local areas, as well as the national pots. So I know lots of community foundations will be the facilitating body for organisations like Children in Need, Comic Relief, etc., etc. And they also know when funding's coming out, so you can sign up to your local community foundation and get updates from them as well. So this is about finding and filtering. And once you've found the funder, it's making sure that you're going to, they're going to be able to help you to meet the need that you're trying to address, that you've got the right legal structure. So you've looked at their guidelines and you fit their eligibility criteria. The deadline fits in with what you're looking at. So it's making sure that your timelines are right. And that if you're looking at revenue, capital, or both, look at what that funder will do. Some funders will do revenue, some funders will do capital, some funders will do both. So you need to make sure that you've basically done all that, and actually you've now got, you might have a list of about 3 funders or 4 funders, or it might just be 1 funder, but you know that you fit all their eligibility criteria. And then next slide, Fran, please, thanks. Then the next thing is then looking at the timing. How many times, I just had somebody contact me actually the other day that said, our funding runs out in 4 months. We need 160,000. I was like, what do you want me to do? I can't help with that. You should have been thinking about that 9 months ago. If you knew funding was going to run out and it's that amount of money, then actually you need to set aside at least 6 months to go to funders to get that amount of money. So you need to think about what it is that you want, what the amount is. And even if it's a small amount, give yourself a good time scale to get your application in, because some of them are rolling programs, which means you can put your application in at any time. But some of them, especially if it's a charitable trust, will have panels where their trustees meet, and they may meet only once a quarter. So you need to make sure that you are fitting within their timeline of grant giving and them looking at grant applications, as well as your timeline for if you've got money running out or a project's due to finish. So just make sure that you've checked all that out, and even do yourself a little funding calendar. So if you know you've got projects due to finish, do a calendar and do it red pen. I'm a visual person, so I like to have things visually up there so I can see when things are running out. So I know, right, I really need to get on that because in October this is going to happen, or November this is going to happen. But that's the next thing to do, is really think about that with the funders. And the next slide, Fran.
I'm going to jump in quickly.
Yeah,
I have control of the slides.
Yeah.
And just picking up on what Joe's saying about sort of making that sort of timetable for yourself when you're funding, always build in more time than you think you need, because it never hurts to have an extra week or 2 weeks in hand, or even longer, so that you can show your bid maybe to somebody else and have a fresh pair of eyes. Or it may be that if we're going to talk about building a relationship with a funder, it may be that you might have extra questions that you might want to go back to a case officer and ask for. Just build in that time, because then they might say something that takes you off down a different route, which will strengthen your application. But you don't want to be sort of working, burning the midnight oil to get that in, if you've allowed yourself that extra sort of week or 2 weeks just to really hone it. So
yeah,
as with all things worth doing, it always takes longer than you think it's going to be. So just make sure you build that into your timetable. And I'm the worst, because Joe and I both work up to the deadlines. But we always plan to try and leave more time, but life doesn't always allow that. Right.
And that's the difficulty, I think, with all of us, is we're all really, really busy. So in theory, this is what we should do. We all do tend to work to very strict deadlines. But it leading on from what Fran said, definitely, if you can factor in some more time, it's brilliant. Because the other thing, and this goes back to what you were talking about, Harry, but also Alicia, when you were talking about that you didn't get any feedback. The other thing with funders is, if you develop a relationship with the funding body that you've been successful with, or even if you've been rejected and they have given you feedback, then actually they will, because the difference between a grant funder and a private investor or a contract is that a grant funder wants you to have that money. They want you to do your project. They want you to be successful. If you get a contract from somebody to deliver a service or an activity or an event, that's different. They will pay you for a service. It's like a commercial relationship. They're paying you to deliver something, and if you don't deliver, they might ask for some of the money back. Grant funders don't like to give the money back because it means they've got to do extra work. So they like you, and they would like to support you to be able to deliver against what it is that you've said you're going to do. Even if you're struggling, they will try and help you. And they do, most funders will have either online or offline support. to get help from them. And if you follow, so I follow my funders. They must think I'm like a virtual stalker, because I tend to keep in touch with all my funders. And for this session, we get in touch with all the people that we know at the funding agencies asking us for top tips. And I literally give them like, you know, why haven't you come back to me? Why haven't you come back to me? But we've built a relationship with these people now that they trust us, and they know when we're asking for something, we're not just doing it for a laugh. We're doing it because we want to help others access their funds and access their funding. So they're very good with us, but that's taking time for us to develop that relationship. And the other thing as well is with funders, if you've been successful and delivered a brilliant project, it may be that you might get additional funding to do the next step or the next level. Or if they don't do that, they might be able to refer you on to another funder that they know is funding a similar sort of work. So by developing that relationship, you get some more information and knowledge from them that you can use when you're developing your projects moving forward. I think most funders do want to help and do try and have physical people to help. I know that Community Fund now has got more boots on the ground. They've got more people helping the local communities. Heritage Fund, the same. I think Arts Council is a slightly different one. If you've got a good relationship with your relationship manager in your area, brilliant. But sometimes you never know who it is that you need to talk to within the Arts Council, and sometimes they might just refer you through to the generic customer service desk. So you just have to try and develop physical relationships where you can, and you can usually find out who the staff are in your areas on the websites of the funders. And once you know who it is, this is where I virtually stalk them. They're usually on LinkedIn. So I will go on LinkedIn and I will try and find them on LinkedIn and friend them on LinkedIn. They might not want to be my friend, but I try and do that anyway. So it's about developing relationships, because if you've got a relationship with them moving forward, they know you've got a track record, then actually they're more likely to try and fund you or refer you on to other organisations and individuals out there. I hope that makes sense. And then I'm passing over to Fran now. So Fran's going to do the next section for us.
Righty ho. Okay, so we're going to look at some of the funders in a little bit more detail. So we're going to cover quite broadly all of these sections. So language and jargon, making sure you've got a good evidence base, although we have touched on that a little bit already. Outputs and outcomes, partners and collaboration, which we've talked about a little bit already, and added value. So I'm going to start off with looking at Arts Council. So this session particularly is looking at bids from £10,000 and under. So the strand that you would go in for at the Arts Council is their National Lottery project grants. Now, the Arts Council is great because they have masses and masses of information for you to look at. All the guidance is on their website. But that's also a downside, because there is masses and masses of information to look at, and there's a lot to go through. So I've pulled out some of the key places to start. And then you can explore more depending on the nature of your project. So the key link for their project grants is on there. They've also got an introductory film which talks about the project grant stream and what they're looking for and what they're hoping to achieve. A lot of their grants, particularly with the project grants, are underpinned by their strategy, which is called Let's Create, which is quite a large strategy. It's also got so it's a 10-year strategy, and then they've got a delivery plan, which at the moment goes from 21 to 24, I think. So they're looking, so you can see what they're focusing on for the next couple of years. And then they've got further information on their outputs and, gosh, it's on my next slide. We'll come to it in a moment. So there's guidance on the actual form itself. There's general guidance under this link here. And then there is, they're one of the few funders, and different funders do it in different ways, that actually provide you with a copy of their application form up front. So you have to search for it on their website. So if you search for National Lottery Project Grants application form questions, it will come up with both a Word document version and a PDF version of all the questions that they will ask you in their application. And that does mean that you can then go away and research at your leisure before actually making your application. Now, the one thing we would say about applying to the Arts Council is make sure you have your portal login set up. So if you've not applied to the Arts Council before, all their applications are done through a grant writing portal called Grantium. It takes a little while to get a Grantium profile set up. If you leave it right to when you actually want to submit, there's every chance that you might run yourself out of time, because as I say, it does take a little bit of time to set up, be approved, and then get to grips with how to use it. There is support and advice from the Arts Council if you are struggling to use Grantium, and if you do struggle to use Grantium, you're not the only one. Lots of people have difficulties using it, but it is the only portal that they use. So everybody else goes through the same process. So I'll just move that on. So the key things that the Arts Council look for in their grant applications are whether you're meeting their outcomes, which are around creative people, cultural communities, and creative and cultural country. So they will ask you in your project grant application how you are going to meet each of those three. They will also ask you to respond to how you're going to meet their investment principles, which are ambition and quality, environmental responsibility, inclusivity and relevance, and dynamism. Now, for a project grant, you only have to respond to the inclusivity and relevance one. But if you are able to respond to any of the others, it will just, it adds more richness and depth to your application. But as Joe said, don't over-egg how you might meet these details. There's a huge amount of information on their website, and I'll send you some more when we do the roundup about the investment principles, and lots of different ideas about how people have met them. Because obviously the Arts Council support visual arts and heritage museums, they have a very, very broad remit. So there are lots of different ways that you can meet the investment principles, in the same way there's lots of different ways that you can meet their outcomes. So all the information is there on their website, and just look at what's been done before. And I thought, let me just have a look. I thought we'd take a break there and I'll just show you the application form. Harry, do you want to jump in while I'm just bringing up the application?
Thank you. Just a quick question. On the last slide, it said dynamism. What does that refer to?
Well, should we have a look on that? We can bring it up on, if I'm being really organised, I can bring it up on their website and we can have a look. Just bear with me while I find it.
I think one of the things as well that you will find with all the funders is, and I know Fran's got a word cloud a bit further on, is the jargon. When it comes to funding applications, sometimes you just have to use the language that they use when you're putting your applications together. So there you go. Well done, Fran.
So this is on the, you have to excuse the millions and millions of internet tabs I have open on my computer. So this is on the main Arts Council website, and I can send you the link for it. So this is part of their information on investment principles, which sits within their Let's Create strategy. So as you can see, there's all these different elements that you can look at. So the investment principles, they go through them one by one. So there's information on ambition and quality, and then dynamism is their second one. So in a nutshell, they've, I've managed to put everybody's heads over the top of it. There we are. It's to do with how you respond to challenges that are coming in the future. So it's about how you make what you're doing sustainable, and so that when they invest their money in you, it's not a one-off and it's not lost at the end of your project. So it's how you're going to respond to what might be coming in the future in a dynamic way. So it's to do with sort of your business planning, or the growth of your project, or the growth of you as a photographer, or how those networks that you might put together might develop, and any challenges that you might come across. The Arts Council are very good in, although they've set all these areas that you need to respond to, they're very much, you need to define yourself what that means to you as a creative practitioner. So they leave it nice and open, which is great because it means that you can respond, but sometimes it also leaves you a little bit sort of like, so where do I start? So that's why we would always advise going and looking at some of their case studies and see if you can find similar projects, just to sort of key into how people have responded. But there's, as I say, there's masses and masses of information on their website. So they do dynamism, and then they'll go through, there's a section on the environmental responsibility, and then inclusivity and relevance. So obviously with the inclusivity and relevance, this is the one that is mandatory if you go in for the project grants. They will ask you to look at their creative case for diversity, which has been around for a number of years now, which is looking at how you make sure your project is reflecting the diversity of the communities that you're that are around you. And they'll also look at ask you to make reference to things like the Equality Act and making sure that you're being inclusive in the way that you're working. So there's always another document to go and read with all the fundraising. So this is why I was saying, sort of make sure you plan in lots of time to be able to not only sit and read these documents, but have time to reflect on how they might be applicable to you or to partners that you're working with. And it may be that you come to the end and go, actually, that element is going to be hard for us to meet. And then that's where you need to think, are they the right funder? Or do I need to pick up the phone and have a chat with them and say, I'm struggling to see how as an organisation we're going to meet the dynamism part of the investment principles. Can you make some suggestions? So it's building in that time to be able to do that. So I hope that sort of answers the question.
Yes, thoroughly. Thank you so much, Fran.
Right, so I thought I'd just show you my version of their project grant application, which I will send as part of the follow-up resources. As I say, with the Arts Council, you apply through an online portal called Grantium. With Heritage Fund, it's online, but it's within their own website, and it's the same with Community Fund. So sometimes, I don't know if you've had it when you've done any sort of online form, sometimes the forms won't let you move on to the next page until you've completed the information on that page, and it means you can't see what's coming next, and that can be very frustrating when you're writing your application. So I would always recommend working offline rather than working on their online portal. So we've set up a Word document for the Arts Council project grants and also for the other two. I think we'll probably only have a chance to go through the Arts Council and the Heritage Fund, but I will send you the Community Fund one as well, but they're a lot more light touch. So I thought I'd just show you some of the sections to start with. So as with all the grant applications, they start with the information about yourself, how much money you're looking for, and they normally ask you just to justify or just explain how you've come to those calculations. You then get into section 2, which is all about your project. So this is where having that case for support can help you get started on some of these areas. So for the Arts Council, they ask you for a 50-word summary and then for a more detailed summary. So it's working out how you express your project in those 2 different word lengths without repeating yourself, because obviously you want to tell them, different things, but so that the 2 descriptions relate to each other. They then ask you to choose where you might fit within this nice long list, and this is just a tick box list. They ask you to think about your audiences, and they define, each of the funders sort of slightly defines their audiences slightly differently, or they ask you to define your audiences. So with the Arts Council, they have these 6 types of audiences that they ask you to think about how you're going to engage with them and how many, and at this stage it's how many, and again how you come to those figures. And it may be that you say, well, in the past we've run a similar project and these are the figures, these are the visitors that we had, or these are the users that we had who attended an event. So this goes back to thinking about the data you might need to collect to write your next funding application. So it's keeping those sort of, even if you've just got a tally chart of the number of people who came through on the day. You may want to contact somebody within your organization if you need to get digital stats off your website, or social media users if you're looking at putting stuff online as well. So it's just thinking about how you might not only come up with the numbers of people who might be involved in your project, but also show how you sort of evidence them and that you use a sort of solid basis to work that out. And it may be, if you're working in partnership, you may say, well, we have X number of users and our partners between us have X number of users, and we think 40% overall may come to this event because that's where the crossover, if you did a Venn diagram where everybody overlaps, this is what we anticipate we will market in such a way to hopefully get those numbers through the door, bums on seats at our, you know, people at our event. So it's just showing them that you've thought it through and that it's realistic. They'll ask you where it's going to take place. They have a quite long section about feasibility and risk, although it looks quite short in the Word document, because these are tables. So they'll ask you how to, the different stages within your plan, within your project, and then ask you to think about any risk that might be attached to that. So for example, you know, if you were running an event and the main person who was running the event, if they were ill, or suddenly, you know, we went back into lockdown, or if you were doing an outside exhibition and suddenly it poured with rain and, you know, put everybody off, or, you know, just thinking through all those different sort of scenarios that might happen and how you would still make your project a success, and just so that you've got those other sort of plan Bs up your sleeve. There's always the obligatory section about finance, and with the Arts Council, I think it's true also with the Heritage Fund, these are tables that you populate, and then so as you put your figures in this column here, it will automatically calculate all your percentages for you. So don't think you've got to do any complicated maths. It will populate it all for you. You just need to think through all those different types of income, and if you struggle with that, you can either speak to the funder, or you can come back to somebody like myself and Joe, or speak to somebody who's been through the process already. And what they're looking to find out is how much other income you're going to have, either if you've got an event that's actually going to earn income, so if you're selling tickets, or if you've got match funding either from your organisation or from another organisation or from a funder, and then how much you're asking from them. They will fund 100%, you know, where you're going for 100% of your costs, but you look like a better risk, if that's the right way to express it, if you've got match funding coming in, but it's not obligatory. It's not always possible to match fund a project. Go on, you jump in.
I was just going to reiterate what Fran said. Even if you do in-kind match, so if you've got volunteers that have been working on things, if you can quantify the hours that those volunteers have spent and then equate that financially. And there are, I know Heritage Fund have got a list of how you equate volunteers' time financially, but putting stuff like that. And this is going to get more and more important with funders, because they, as we've said earlier, they're wanting a bigger bang for their buck. So they're wanting you to try and put some match in, if possible, and collaborate with different people. So I think even if you can put in-kind match, if it's not cash match, then actually that just shows that, you know, you're recognizing the importance that you've got to provide some financial addition to the grant application.
Yeah, and as Joe says, your in-kind costs can be volunteers. It could be somebody who's lent you a venue, so it'd be whatever that the charge would be for that venue. It could be that you've got somebody coming in to help train volunteers or facilitate a session. I work on a project where we're really lucky within we're a volunteer organisation, but we're really lucky that we've got a filmmaker within our team. So quite often he goes off and makes films for us. So we always put him in as an in-kind cost, because his day rate is always a nice meaty day rate. So it looks good as an in-kind cost. So it's just thinking about those skills that you think, oh, well, they're just going to come in and do that. You think, actually, no, I could put a cost against that. Yeah. And then put that in as in-kind match. So even if you're struggling for proper cold hard cash in kind, you will always have some cold hard cash match funding. You'll always have some in kind somewhere along the lines. Joe, you were going to say?
I'm going to say, Harry, is that you wanting to say something there? Your hand is up, or is that an old hand? Your hand's
still up.
Is that an old hand? Because linking to what you said earlier, Harry, about all the people that you're working with, there's a massive amount of in-kind money there with archaeologists, with all the different people that you're working with, you know, historians. So anything like that, and also any businesses, if you've had anything like Fran said, if you're getting venues for free, or any businesses have done anything, business support that, you know, as part of sort of whether that's, you know, corporate social responsibility, or they're doing something to help you, that sort of stuff looks good as well.
Yeah, and on the project, my volunteer project that I was talking about, we're about to run an event as part of, I'm based in Brighton, so we've got an event running in the Brighton Festival, and we've got a good relationship with Brighton and Hove buses, and they're putting our posters on all their buses for the month running up to the event, which is marketing that we would, as a volunteer organisation, we would never be able to afford to do that sort of marketing when it's seen on well, I think it's going on about 60% of the buses across the city. Even if it's only up for sort of 2-3 weeks, that's you know, we always put that in as in-kind costs. It's fantastic. You know, we absolutely bite their hand off every time they offer it to us, because they really like what we do. So it's thinking of all those things, and if you, and it's thinking about people who might want to be able to do that sort of thing for you for the purpose of your project, to say, oh, it'd be really great, would you be able to help us with this? I can put you in as an in-kind cost into our application.
Can I just say, I've managed to establish a link with the University of Plymouth University, a digital media lab, state-of-the-art scanners and so on and so forth, and I'll be working with them. So that I mean, it would cost me a fortune to actually sort of high-end equipment. So that could be in-kind funding.
Definitely, definitely,
Definitely, and I put in there, there's sort of two strands to that, because it's not only the use of the equipment. Depends if you're going to use the equipment yourself or whether their staff are going to do it on your behalf, because there could be in-kind contribution for the actual use of the space, but then also their staff time as well. So
and you can find out from them, can't you, how much they would commercially charge out for use of that facility.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And then they ask you, as with all funders, to list everything that you need to pay for as part of your project and how much it is. It may be that you need, I don't know, a volunteer coordinator, or, you know, but you're talking about your digital skills and the use of that university resources. It might be that you need their technician to help for X number of days at £200 a day, and then you put the total in as you go through the funding. Oh, jumped around a little bit. They will ask you if you've spent against any of their headings, and you get 1,500 characters. Now, with the Arts Council, it's always characters. With Heritage Fund, it's always words. And then Joe and I both found you can write your Word document to the absolute, so you're dead on 1,500 characters. You'll put it into Grantium, and it will tell you you've written too much.
It's true.
And so that's why we always say allow a little bit more time, because Grantium now counts things slightly differently. So it's always good sort of testing it. Normally it's characters including the spaces, I think, last time I checked. So all your spaces count as characters. So it's just making sure that you're either always slightly under the word of a character count, so that you don't have to then go back at the last minute and re-edit all your beautifully finely honed text. So
I've spent many a happy all-nighter having fun with Grantium, editing and re-editing text, and saying a few swear words as I'm doing it as well. It happens
to everybody. I mean, but as I said, everybody goes through the same process. So, but it's just being aware of it before we go through. So you can say, I mean, it may be that not all of these headings are applicable for your project, and if that's the case, that's fine. You're under no obligation to, I say, you don't need to put everything under every heading, but just be aware. So you'll have 1,500 characters. So if you were to tick artistic spending, a little box would pop up and you put your information in there. The stuff about travel costs. It asks about your experience of managing projects before, so you can tick whether you've done something like this or whether it's something that's new, because they're looking to see whether they need to provide you with extra support. Partners and collaborators. So this would be perfect for you, Harry. So you can put in your list of partners, and I think you get the opportunity to say where they are, whether they're a lead partner, whether they're support, whether it's part of a network. You can express all of that there. And again, they ask for experience, what experience you have. Oh yeah, so this is where there's a bit more on the risks. So this is going back to your project plan and working out the risks. Now, the bit that I thought would be the meat and refers to what we've talked about is how you meet their outcomes. So this is where you need to tick which one of these three, or as many as you can meet, but again, don't over egg it, of their three outcomes that you meet. Then you have 1,500 characters to put your response in. And then you need to respond to their investment principles. So although as Joe was saying, all the funders want to fund you, they want your project to be a success, but obviously they are responsible to their board, their trustee. A lot of them are giving out, our vehicles for giving out money that's come from government. They need to be seen to be delivering on their agenda. So you need to show them how your project is helping the Arts Council or Heritage Fund or whichever funder you're going to. How is your project helping them deliver against their goals? And that's essentially what the investment principles are, and with the outcomes as well, because they can go back and say, we are delivering against all of these, and this is a fantastic project that is delivering against lots of communities. And then, look how they've met the ambition and quality and the inclusivity and relevance areas within our investment principles. You could be a flagship project for them, but you need to show how your project's going to meet that. So you need to think carefully about how you write those sections. So they then break it down, and I say inclusivity and relevance is the only mandatory one for project grants. And they break it down into communities and workforce. There's a separate section about how you meet the creative case for diversity, which again is making sure that you're including a diverse range of people within your project. So it's not just one response to that inclusivity and relevance section, it's actually 3 separate responses. So you've got 4,500 characters. So there's actually quite a lot to fill in just for that one mandatory section. And then it's up to you whether your project meets the environmental responsibility, the ambition and quality, and then the dynamism. And again, under each of them, they've got sort of 3 headings. So you've got about 4,500 characters, sometimes more, to fill in about each of those. So that's where you need to spend that time going back and looking at their website, reading through all the investment principle information, and just thinking quite carefully through how you might match it. Because if you want to be one of their flagship projects, which is which is what they're looking for, so that you become successful with your funding, this is where your opportunity to really show that. So that's the project grant application form. I'll just go back to the slideshow. Where have we got to? There we are. And I'll send that through so that everybody's got a copy of it. What I would say is periodically the grant applications change. That application has been around since the mid to the end of last year. Before the summer of last year, it was slightly different. And yeah, lots of people got caught out that it got changed and people hadn't realised that the funding changed. So much as we're going to send you through all this information, if you suddenly don't write a funding bid for maybe 6 to 9 months, do go back and check that the copies that you've got are the current copies, because it is soul destroying. And I think Joe and I have both been there, where you've written a funding bid to one format and you go to upload it and go, oh, that's a question I haven't answered. And then you have to go back and rejig it all. It happens to the best of us. So that was the Arts Council. Moving on to the National Lottery Heritage Fund. So they have a grants programme which is £3,000 to £10,000. That's the introductory link and their priorities. So, and then they've also got an introductory film about their priorities as well. Now, the priorities for the Heritage Fund have changed over the last few years. They're still funding heritage, but they're funding heritage in a slightly different way. So if we look at their priorities, their top priorities are now these 6 here. And heritage is now a lower outcome. So you can use heritage to meet any of these top 6 priorities, but you do need to hit one of those for it to be a project that they will be looking to fund. Heritage on its own now is not enough, or heritage engagement is not enough on its own. And naturally, I think your projects will meet some of those, but it's just thinking, again, carefully thinking through how your heritage is almost the vehicle through which you can address, well-being or skills development, or it's helping your organisation develop the organisational resilience. So it's thinking about how you link your heritage to those other topics. And then hopefully as a part of that, you may meet some of these other outcomes, the sort of the pale green ones, around heritage being in a better condition, being better identified and better explained, and that other people will have learnt about heritage. And this is where this might be a good one for you to look at as well. In addition to the Arts Council, Harry, that you're looking at landscapes and nature. I don't know if other people's projects, I mean, community heritage might be a good one for you, Sarah, with age concern. So there may be other ones that are appropriate for you there.
And I think, just leading on from what Fran said as well, I think one of the things that's happening across these lottery funders, and more so I think community fund's the one that's out ahead, but with Heritage and Arts Council, it's all about heritage for all, Arts Council culture for all. So it's more about communities, engaging with those communities, than it is about how important a specific piece of heritage is or a specific piece of art is. I think the pandemic's highlighted with those funders that actually the importance is about how the whole community gets involved or feels that it can get involved with what is technically our heritage and our culture. I think Community Fund has always done that, but it's now starting to get embedded within the heritage and the arts lottery funders as well.
So I'm just going to jump out of that and we'll have a quick go through the Heritage Fund one. There we are. So this is a Word version, and again I will share this with you, of the current National Lottery Heritage Fund 3 to 10k grant application. On both of them I've tried to put the date that I've put them together, so that you, just as an aid memoir to check, you know, if you suddenly don't do an application for another 6 or 9 months. So it follows a not dissimilar, you know, the funders, their applications are not wildly apart, but quite often they ask you for similar information but in different ways. So heritage funds start with, you know, describe your idea. So you have 500 words, not dissimilar to 1500 characters, but slightly easier to calculate sometimes. They want to know if you're going to be part of capital work, if you're going to be doing building, and if you need permission. They're very keen to make sure that you are the owners of your project. Heritage Fund are very keen to know the difference that your project will make, how this comes back to the impact that your project's going to make. How will this change the lives, the attitudes, the well-being, whatever aspect you're going to include in your project, what difference will it make? And what essentially they're asking as part of this is, what difference will our investment make to your local community? Heritage Fund are very keen to know how their money is going to make a difference. And going back to something that Joe said, they also quite often want to know, if they weren't to invest the money, would you be able to make that difference without them? And hopefully you would always be in a position to say, no, we can do a proportion of it, but we can't do everything that we wanted to do. Because if you could do everything you wanted to do without their fund, they would say, well, actually, there are projects that are in greater need than you are. Yeah. So you want to show that you can deliver the work, but you don't want to be so capable that you could do it without them. So it's quite a fine balance. Yeah. So you need to demonstrate the need from your community, the need that you have as an organisation for their financial investment, but just stop shy of being able to say, well, actually, we could do it without you. We just fancied applying for a bit of funding, so we didn't spend our money. You need to say, actually, as an organisation, we can't deliver X, Y, and Z because we need to bring in skills, or we need to have a venue, or,
Goes back to the case for support, doesn't it? It goes back to making sure that your case for support is there, and you can, if you look at all the questions on all these forms, they are similar questions to the case for support. And definitely.
It's the difference your projects will make. Why is your project important to the community? What will happen after your project ends? Why are you the best person to deliver this project? All these sort of things. Why does it have to be you? Why do we have to invest in you? Why does it need to happen now? They're real key things that come out in the Heritage Fund applications. So they're interested in the range of people that you're going to involve. And then these are the priorities that we've just looked at. So their outcomes. So you can tick as many of these as apply to you. They then have an online table where you can add in all your costs. They have preset headings for their costs, and I've listed them all here. So there's professional fees, recruitment, heritage items, repair and conservation work. And you might not have items that are relevant for your project under each of these headings. So only use the headings that are relevant for you. So there's a whole list of them there. I won't go through them now. There's a whole list all the way down. Then just like there is on the Arts Council, they ask about where your money is coming from. So if you've got any other cash contributions, whether you've got in kind, they like to know whether you've secured your cash contributions. Quite often in projects, you've got somebody who'll say, oh, I'll invest, I'll give you match funding of £500 if your application is successful. So that's you have got that cash contribution, but it's not secured. So it's dependent on the success of this application. Other people will say, well, I'll give you £500 whether you're successful or not. So then you've got a secured. So it's just working out where that other money is coming from. Again, looking at non-cash contributions, so that's all your in-kinds, volunteer time, if you've got volunteers involved in your project, evidence of support. So you can have all sorts of, they accept evidence in all sorts of different ways. It's not just letters of support now, as they say, you can have videos, you can have copies of emails, and then you need to describe it. In addition to that, they always like you to upload your governing documents, audited copy of accounts, and then there's a long bit at the end about the declaration. So that's all declaration stuff about saying that you've read all their information. So it's a slightly different structure. I hope you can see they're asking for similar information to the Arts Council one, but it's just structured in a slightly different way. So the key areas on this application, sorry, making everybody's eyes go funny by scrolling up and down, are these sections. What difference will your project make? Why is your project important? What will happen after the project ends? How will you involve a wider range of people? Ooh, I think that was it. Yeah, and then you come to the outcomes. And you've got 500 words for each of those sections, apart from the last one, which is only 300 words. So it's thinking about how you put information into all of those. So that's where you describe your project in its fullest way. There used to be sections in the application forms where you could describe your projects in a lot more detail. And that has gone from both the Arts Council and the Heritage Fund applications now, because they want to know what you're doing as your project, but they're more interested in knowing what the impact is and how you're involving the community. And that just reflects their change in priorities. And then the flip side of that is then how are you going to help them meet their priorities? So that's sort of the change that's sort of happened over the last, well, as a result of the pandemic, really, isn't it, Joe?
Yeah, definitely. And they're more, I think the thing is now, because there's so much more competition, they're by using these sort of processes, because a lot of them as well are doing like two-stage processes, so they can filter out as well. So again, and I know I keep bleating on about a case for support, but if you do have that template in front of you, then you can pretty much answer a lot of those questions that they're asking for, because you've got that data on your case for support and you've got it all sat waiting.
So then the third one, which I'm afraid we're not going to have time to look at in so much detail, is the National Lottery Community Fund. They have, their main fund is Awards for All, and that runs, there's slightly separate versions that run across all 4 home nations. They do also have a couple of other strands that are up and running. One is linked to working with veterans, and another one is a broader community fund, which is slightly more geared towards sort of well-being and sort of strictly voluntary work around volunteers. Awards for All is the one that tends to capture the more heritage type projects. It's they're a lot more light touch than Heritage Fund and the Arts Council. All their guidance is on the website. There isn't a downloadable form, although I will do a Word document version and send it through, and you'll be able to compare and contrast and see that they're a lot more I say sort of slightly less onerous in the information that they require. It's for voluntary and community organisations only, so that may mean that you might not be eligible, but do check, because there are some sort of more detailed criteria, and any funding that comes from them does need to be completed within your project needs to be completed within a year, whereas Arts Council and Heritage Fund, you can go on for longer than that, 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. I think from your perspective, Sarah, as well, if you're looking at community fund, it is, out of all the smaller funding pots, I would say, having done a few of them, probably the easiest of the lottery funders to, and they've gone through so many incarnations of the form. I can remember a few years ago, actually, they were doing a pilot where you only had to answer 4 questions. It was brilliant. It was really, really good. And it's changed slightly, but I think, you know, it's a lot easier to complete. It's a lot less onerous than having to go through the Grantium joy. And they have got more boots on the ground. So they've got more people that will assist to give you support if you need. Again, because they want you to be successful with it. And I know they've recently, they've had the Platinum Jubilee stuff out, haven't they, as well?
Yes, that's open at the moment, the Platinum Jubilee. So that might be perfect for Age UK rather to go for Platinum Jubilee money.
And also the Reaching Communities as well, which is their main bigger one, because they split that between going for bigger pots over 30k and smaller pots under 30k. And that is obviously, if you go for that amount of money, you can do it over a longer period of time. You can employ staff. Whereas the Awards for All is very much time defined and more about running sort of time limited events and activities over that 12-month period, which is slightly harder to get staff when you're looking at just a 12-month period.
And it's quite an emphasis on volunteers, isn't it? And upskilling volunteers, I think.
But so we have, sorry, Fran. I was just about to say we've got some top tips at the end, which have come from our rep at the Community Fund. And it's a blog that's literally just been launched by them as well around Awards for All. So you'll get that information as well at the end.
So in contrast to Heritage Fund and the Arts Council, where there's lots of information to read on their websites, this was the key bit of information that was on the Community Fund. It just said what makes a good application. Really clear, really succinct. And actually, it just made me realise, I didn't say on the Heritage Fund website, there is guidance for lots of different types of projects, and I will make sure I include that link and links to some of the guidance, because they always expect you to have read all the guidance before you put your application in. But anyway, so this is the Community Fund. We've touched on this already. As you will read through all the information from whichever funder you go, you will find that there will be buzzwords and ways that they phrase things. It is great if you can use some of that language in your application, because it shows that you've understood where they're coming from and that you can see how that language relates to your project. Sometimes it can feel a bit unnatural and a bit clunky calling things, you know, all these buzzwords around sort of resilience and diversity and well-being and participation, but you know, it's just different ways of expressing, you know, ideas that we've all been having, you know, collaborative working, you know, creative practitioners, you know, so all sorts of you know words. And so these are the ones that I just pulled out, but as you go through, as you're reading the guidance, I always have a pen and paper next to me, and if I come across a phrase that I think looks good, I write it down and then think, oh, you know, there might be an opportunity to use that in the application. And it just shows, also demonstrates to the funder that you've read their guidance if you're using their language. So it's helping them be more confident in you as an applicant. Oh, where are we? Oh, it said statistics and case studies. So you need to just make sure you know there's a need, particularly if you're in a geographic area. And it may be, Joe, you might be able to say more about this, but different funders have priority areas for funding. Yeah. So, I mean, a colleague of ours is doing a number of funding bids for a museum in Gosport in Hampshire, and they are a priority area funding. So they've had a lot of interest because they are in one of those funding areas that they're really keen to fund. Not everybody is in a priority area. It may be that there are particular aspects of your work that a funder will be really keen to fund. Yeah. Or you may find you are one of many projects all trying to do a similar thing. And if somebody's got in there before you and got funding, the funders may be less keen to fund a similar project within a geographic area. Joe, is there anything you want to add to that?
Just a couple of points. So the geographical hotspot, a quick interesting story for you is the many nights that I spent doing granting and doing application forms. One of the organisations that I did it for got rejected by a lottery funder because it wasn't deemed as significant enough. And then ironically, a couple of weeks later, that local area became a hotspot for that funder, and suddenly that organisation became more significant because they were part of a geographical hotspot that the big bosses within the organisation had told them they had to fund. So you can imagine my joy for the organisation, but not for the night I spent doing an application that got rejected. So that just shows you sometimes when they get told you've got to hit this geographical area, that they do. And also as well, you can find out from funders, you can talk to them. So, you know, they're either going to say yes or no. There's nothing dramatic, so they will let you know. And also, if your area of work has been identified as important as well, talk to one of the officers and say, is this something that you're looking at promoting or supporting? And with regards to if there's somebody else near you that's done a similar project, then funders will look at that and they won't fund another project that's doing a similar sort of thing. So if you know somebody that's looking to do something that you're looking to do, then collaborate with them. It goes back to what you were doing, Harry, about making sure that you work in partnership with people and collaborate. And also look at who funders have recently funded. And there's a couple of slides coming up where you can find out about that information as well.
There we are, as if by magic, Joe. So these are the links to either case studies or projects that have been funded recently for each of those three funders, and it's quite a good way to spend a cup of tea just flicking through who's been funded before you. Just look at how they've approached a project, and the case studies don't always tell you everything you need to know, but there's nothing stopping you finding that organisation and calling them up and saying, well, we're looking at doing something similar. I'd be really interested to just chat, you know, have you got 5 minutes to chat about how you did that, because I'm really interested to know how you delivered that, and or, you know, who did you use, or what, you know. So, and people are quite often, you know, more than happy to share their experiences. So yeah, use that sort of database to your advantage, or use those case studies to your advantage, because it's also the funders saying these are the sorts of projects we like to fund. But obviously don't go in with a carbon copy, because obviously they've just funded something like that. You need to be sort of the next step, but it gives you a feel, hopefully it will give you a feel for the sort of things that they are interested in. And so it's looking at the content, but it's also looking at the approaches that people have used in the past. And hopefully you'll find that your project is meeting those, or you can either talk to the funder or possibly approach some of the past grant recipients to say, oh, yeah, can I just chat to you about your project? I'd be really interested to know more. Joe, do you want to talk about stats quickly?
Yeah, so if you haven't already, I cannot promote this website enough. 360 Giving, which is a website that anybody can go on, and it's where you can check what funders are doing, where the money's going, what they're funding, and basically 360 Giving gives organisations the opportunity to openly publish their grant data. So as well as going onto the websites that Fran's just mentioned, you can go into 360 Giving as well and find out about different grants that have been given out, and you can filter it down. So at the moment, they've got 225 funders on that website with 723,000 different grants in total. And that totals around £173 billion worth of money given out since they've started 360 Giving. So this slide here is what I did the other day, which was just finding out how many grants were given out in 2021 in South Yorkshire, which is where I'm from, Sheffield. So how many grants to how many organisations, how much in total, and the average grant. And this was between £5,000 and £100,000. So you've got in 2021, there were 1,941 grants, 1,794 recipients. The amount of money given out was 38.1 million, and the average grant per recipient was £19.6 thousand. And I just did that really quickly. And then that detail then on the next slide is devolved down a little bit more. So that tells you who the funders were. So you can see there on lottery distributors, the 726 of the grants were from lottery funders, and 697 were from traditional trusts and foundations. Then it tells you about the award amount. So 1,268 of those grants were between £10,000 and £100,000. And then 673 were 5,000 to 10,000. And then it tells you when the grants were given out. So you can see the trends of the grants and when they've been given out. So you can do this really simply, and you can do it by geography. So you can do it by where you are locally, or you could do it by type of funder. So you can drill down and find a specific funder and find out who they funded. And you can also do it by project as well. So you can find out about different projects on there. So the next slide shows you just how good or bad the different funders are at putting their data up. So the last time that National Lottery Heritage Fund uploaded their grants data was in March 2020. Not brilliant. They could do better, I think, if they were at school. That's what I've come back from the teacher. Could do better. The next one is the Arts Council. So they haven't put anything up since March 2019, which is not good at all. But the final one, which is the Community Fund, they're brilliant. They love 360 giving. The last time they put theirs up was September 2021. So they're doing it on a regular basis. So you can get to find out and you can do comparators. So yeah, for me, as you can tell, I love it. I think it's brilliant. And the fact that all this public funding, they're uploading onto this, open source website, and it's taken time for 360 giving to build momentum. But actually now we've got to the stage where, they're pretty much now endorsed. And it's not just grant funders, you've got government departments as well. So it's endorsed by central government as well as the major grant funders. So yeah, a useful tool for you when you're looking at finding out what's out there and who's done what, when, where and why.
And I think particularly when you're talking about timings, because as you were saying, Joe, so many projects were put on hold during the pandemic, and so many of the funders are maxed out now. So to be able to sort of time your application, so you hopefully you're not up against, everybody else, every man on your street who's putting in their application to the same grant round to you, just to be able to time it, I think that's really valuable. Yeah. It's also worth, you can also, chat to your funder about that. You say, I'm thinking of applying in, what we now say, I think I'm applying in May this year for a 10 grand grant. Do you know if there's lots of people going through on that current grant round? And, they'll either be able to tell you or they won't. But quite often, if there's masses and masses of people going through, they sometimes can say, actually, you might be better off waiting for the next grant round. So it's always worth just trying to suss out that information as well, because it's lots and lots of applications are being rejected at the moment, and it's not because they're not good quality applications, it's just the sheer volume of applications that are going through at the moment. Yeah. So it's just trying to, I hope what we've been trying to say throughout this whole webinar is just, if you can make your bid as good as it can be by meeting all those criteria, but then also sort of the cherry on the cake is thinking about how you time it into their submission. This is where it comes back to thinking about the timing of your project and building that relationship with the funder so that you can ask for that sort of information, so that you're not one of those good quality applications that gets rejected just because, they had £1 million in the pot, but they had £6 million worth of project applications coming in. So that happens quite a lot, and it's quite soul destroying, because quite often it's very difficult for them to give feedback then, because they'll say, yes, you were a good quality project. They might come up with a couple of sort of nuanced things, but they'll just come back and say it's the sheer volume of people going through the system. Right, Joe, do you want to do top tips?
Yes, so we went and spoke to our lovely friends at the different funders and asked them for their top tips. So we've got a lovely person that works at Arts Council. She came from the Heritage Fund and she now works at the Arts Council. She loves us dearly. So we've already got a top tip sheet that she did for us at a previous session we did in November last year, which we can send out. But these are on top of those top tips. So basically, as I think we've been saying all morning, read the questions and the prompts and make sure you answer them. So I think all of the people that came back to me said the ATFQ acronym, which is answer the flipping question, which was all of them coming back to us saying that. The other thing is, she said, don't try and answer all the outcomes and the investment principles. Consider them and select the most relevant ones to your project and then answer those really well. Quality, not quantity. And obviously make sure you address the mandatory ones. As we've been saying, she said it's extremely competitive for funds, so think about what you need to make the project happen, but be realistic. Couple of updates. Volunteering Futures had closed, which is fine, but there is a time limited fund at the moment called Unlocking Collections, which is currently running, and that's currently running until November 2022. The one on the bottom is Developing Your Creative Practice, which closed the other month. That was round 13. So round 14, which is the next one, is opening up on the 31st of May. And that's for individual practitioners to look at how they want to develop what it is that they're doing creatively. And that's up to £10,000. So that was the Arts Council. Heritage Fund. So we've got a couple from the Heritage Fund, from two different Heritage Fund officers. So this is from the lovely Helen, who said, projects, even the little ones, need a contingency budget. She said, we're seeing a lot of projects struggle at the moment due to the wider issues we're all facing. So even a little bit of flexibility in budgets is good. I will endorse this, having been involved with an organisation in Wales that applied for a huge amount of money on capital, and the amount of contingency that they've put in did not cope with the pandemic hitting them, and B, the increase in construction costs for what they were doing. So they've had to go back to ask for additional monies because they just can't cover getting the building finished. And I know that's for a bigger amount of money, but what she's saying here is think about what might happen and make sure you've got a contingency in there.
Normally, sorry, I'll just jump in quickly. Normally, the funders will let you know how much contingency you can put in on your project. As a rule of thumb, it tends to be about 5%, but if they will let you put in more as your contingency, then it's worth it. And particularly at the moment, as Joe was saying, they understand that you need to, allow for unforeseen things to happen. Sorry, back to you, Joe.
No, it's fine. No, it's all good. So she also said it's useful for projects to have a stuff budget, which I know doesn't help. It's not really, the stuff line on your budget. But that could be equipment. What she's saying is it's about having that little bit of flexibility. So especially when you're working with the community, she's doing, we all know that we love shiny PowerPoints, but sometimes just having a flip chart, Post-its and pens when you're doing outreach sessions or working with communities is what they want, because not everybody wants to do a shiny PowerPoint. They actually want to stick Post-it notes on flip charts. I love Post-it notes. I love flip charts. I love Magic Whiteboard as well. So stuff like that, which will help you work better with different communities, different demographics, is what she's saying. You need to have that equipment type budget allocation. Support capacity. This is exactly what I said earlier. Volunteers are amazing, but the sector is at burnout point. So as much as it is lovely to involve volunteers, groups really need to ensure that they are not relying too heavily on them, as it can be a risk to delivery, and we would certainly not want to contribute to the sector burnout we're seeing. So again, don't automatically presume that you can rely on volunteers to deliver your project, because that may not happen. Something may happen to prevent that from happening, and therefore you need to find the funding to be able to deliver against what you said you'd do. And then also, if you're looking at digital projects, we've all been dragged kicking and screaming into the digital sector, haven't we? There are lots of resources on Heritage Fund website and links to free workshops and things that they're doing around using digital. And even if you're not working in the heritage sector, Sarah, there's stuff on there that you can access, which is around how you can embrace digital and embed it into your current working practices. So that's Heritage Fund Part 1. Part 2 makes me laugh because it's from a different officer from the Heritage Fund, who, as you can see in bold, goes back to what we said: read the guidance, read the guidance, read the guidance, and it comes back to that answer the question. So she basically said, see what examples of projects a funder has on the website, which we've mentioned. Do they offer workshops or events? They do. For the £3,000 to £10,000 grants, they offer free workshops for people to attend. Speak to your local CVS for support on organisational structures if you're not already constituted. So again, going back to what I said earlier about, there are local CVS's, voluntary actions, or you can use the Sporting Heritage Toolkit again, if you're looking at governance and legal structures, and get advice if you've not got the right legal structure. See what the funder you're interested in has funded in your local area and speak to the group about their experiences. Flipping heck, Fran, it's like Louise was channeling you when you said that earlier. And then call the funder if the guidance makes no sense after 5 times of reading it. So again, that's showing that actually we want to help you. So if you don't understand it, come back to us and we'll help you. Don't overclaim your project impacts. So we have a mandatory outcome and 8 others. Often smaller grants say they'll do them all. Don't. Do 1, maybe 2, but do them well. So that's the Heritage Fund.
I know, and it does make me giggle that they say read the guidance, because it's so true. And the read the guidance and answer the questions sort of go hand in hand, because there have been a number of applications, because Joe and I look at applications for other people, where it's really easy when you're really enthusiastic about your project to get carried away telling the story of your project or the story of your organization, and how, you know, we're a fantastic organization and we do this and we do that and we're going to do this. But actually, that's not what the question's asking you. So you've got to just take that step back and go, what are they wanting to know from me? And it comes back to, there will be information in the guidance, but I hope that some of the things that we've talked about today will help you answer those questions in a way that you're referring to all the information that's on their website. Right, Joe, next one.
Last but by no means least of the funders, Community Fund. So I know this is not necessarily top tips, but what she has said, so this is Jenny basically saying they look at, and I think the Community Fund do this more than Arts and Heritage, but they do specifically look at Charities Commission and Companies House. And to be honest, that's what I do when I work with clients and organisations. The first thing I do is go up on Charities Commission or Companies House and find out about them. So get to see who the board is, the directors, look at the accounts that are on there. And that's exactly what every single funder does, to make sure that you're legally constituted, you've got a board and you've got up-to-date accounts. So they will do that. But then the 2 blogs that she's put down there, the first one, which is Strengthening Your Awards for All England application form, is the really recent one we talked about. That literally went up last week. So that's something that you can look at and look at how your Awards for All application can be the best that it can be. And then the next one is just really looking at how you can get to be project ready on Awards for All. But it's useful stuff. And like us, you know, basically she said, read and follow the guidance. And more importantly, if there are any questions, call them. Or if you know the local officer, speak to the local officer, email the local officer and ask them. Like Louise said from the Heritage Fund, if you don't understand the guidance after reading it 5 times, then ask them. And it goes back to the point that I made earlier about they want you to have the money. The money is there to be spent in local communities, and therefore they want you to put an application in. So they will help you to do that. And then the final pointers that we've got are from, so the organisation that I mentioned to you earlier that does a funding database called Community Matters. So this is from them, and they're a local charitable incorporated organisation, CAO, based in Leeds, West Yorkshire. And this is what they said to us, is that the recent research they found from the Directory of Social Change revealed that 1/3 of all applications to funders ended up in the bin because they were ineligible. And that's 361,000 applications and an awful lot of wasted effort, because you think about the time it takes to do those application forms. And they said, were they hopeless projects making little or no difference to people's lives? Absolutely not. They were rejected because the application didn't meet the criteria. So again, it goes back to exactly what we said, which is make sure you read things before you answer them. I know it sounds really simple, but you know, 361,000 applications nationally is a lot. The next one from them is if you've failed. So why applications failed, and bearing in mind this is an organisation that helps local charities to do application forms. So the funder will only fund registered charities, again making sure that you fit their criteria legally. The project doesn't meet the criteria, goes back to money versus mission. Don't do mission drift just because you need the money. Project doesn't demonstrate need, case for support. The project is poorly planned, case for support. The form is incomplete or illegible, so making sure that you answer all the questions that need to be answered within the character count or word count. You've missed the deadline. Make sure you see when the forms have got to be completed. If it's not a rolling program application, make sure that you fit the panel dates. And supporting documents are missing or inaccurate. And I know Fran's found this with some of the organisations that she's worked with, as I have. There are certain ways that some funders like you to upload documents, and you have to do it that way, otherwise they won't accept the application. Projects are not presented clearly and concisely. The budget doesn't add up, or there's no monitoring or evaluation process in place. So again, all those things that we put in the case for support, you know, that's what their advice is. And the final one from them was tips for getting it right. Plan ahead. Again, it's like they've channeled Fran and I. Plan ahead. It can take 6 months or more to get a decision. Think outside the box. Can you break your project down into smaller lots, stages to completion? Can you do it in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3? Read their specifications, their criteria. Make sure that your organisation or your project fits their profile, fits their criteria, money versus mission. And there are no shortcuts. If it's an application form, then you have to complete it. They call the tune. They do. And at the end of the day, you know, we are at their mercy sometimes. And read the whole form before you start. So again, with the downloadable forms, where Fran's downloaded the actual online application, when you go through that offline, you've got time to make sure that you're answering all the questions, you're fitting the character count, you're hitting the criteria, you're hitting their investment principles or outputs and outcomes before you actually go online and do it all online. So again, really useful. And they do this day in, day out. So quite useful. And I think the final, is that another one? Oh, some more there. Complete the form in full, being very specific about how you'll use the money. If it's technical, explain. Don't use acronyms without explanation. I know sometimes, and interestingly, I think when I was talking to my contact, my colleague at Age UK Barnes, they used an acronym for one of the partners, and I was like, I've got no idea what you're talking about. I don't know who they are. And I had to ask and say, please tell me who that is. So don't do that with the funders, because you have to presume that the funders know nothing about you, even if they do, and you need to elaborate on everything. Don't waffle, you know. That's one of the other things. It's very difficult to do that when you've got a character count and a word count. So you've got to be very clear, very succinct, and very concise to make sure that you're getting the right information through in that piece that you're writing, that narrative, that copy. And read your submission carefully. Spell check is a wonderful tool. Get somebody else to read it. Get a critical friend, somebody that you trust, to go through it to make sure that it makes sense and actually they're reading it and they can understand it. Or if you can get a funder to just have a look at it before it's submitted, then do. But yeah, do that. Because I think sometimes we don't do that because we want to get the application in. And sometimes we don't want to hear from people that we might not put things in that we should have done. I'm like that. So, but it's really important to do that.
Yeah, I think so. Building on from that, or even if you've done all the things that we've talked about in this session, where you've built your relationship with your funder and you've chatted to them about the project, it won't necessarily be them who sits on the panel to make the decision about your project. So quite often, and I think this is particularly true with Arts Council, but I'm sure is equally, you know, it carries across the other funders. Quite often you have people on the panel who won't be familiar with your area of work. So you may have, for example, quite often when I'm working with museum clients, quite often I'll have to say something. You might be assessed by somebody who's a dance or a theatre specialist, and you cannot assume that they will know about your sector in the detail that you will want them to know. So it's getting somebody who knows a little bit about your project but doesn't know all the ins and outs to read it before you submit is always a good idea. All right, so I think we're on to our last 2 slides.
Yeah.
Thrilled to know.
So these are just useful information and resources. And I'm going to apologise for using acronyms. I couldn't be bothered to write out the full names. I'm sorry. So I'll go through them. Obviously, Sporting Heritage via Community Matters Yorkshire. The Sporting Heritage members can access a funding database that Community Matters Yorkshire have got a partnership with Sporting Heritage to do that. But also, if you wanted to join Community Matters Yorkshire, it's £10 to get on their funding database. So the next one is Arts Council England have got information about funders. So have Heritage Fund. The Architectural Heritage Fund have, in partnership with, I think it's the Heritage Alliance, the Heritage Funding Directory, which is just below. Esme Fairburn have information. And also, as I mentioned before, your local community foundation will have local grants that are coming out in your area as well as national grants. NAVCA, which is the National Association of Voluntary and Community Action, is the umbrella body that represents all the local CVSs, Council for Voluntary Service and Voluntary Action organisations in your local area. They do an e-bulletin called Links, comes out every 2 weeks, and they've got funding information on there, as well as a whole host of information about policy, procedure, government, really, really useful, free to subscribe to. And it's a great e-newsletter. There's the Directory of Social Change that do stuff, but they do charge for quite a lot of their stuff. 360 Giving, as I've mentioned, Heritage Funding Directory, local CVSs and voluntary actions. Some of them do have funding newsletters attached to the work that they do. And then obviously there's the Community Matters Yorkshire, which I mentioned to you earlier. I mean, this is not exhaustive. There's loads of stuff out there, guys, but I'm thinking about the stuff that's free. So on this final one here, we've got Ncbo, which stands for the National Council for Voluntary Organisations, and they have loads of information on their know-how non-profit website, and they've got a cultural commissioning element to it as well. And also Ncbo have just taken on some of the assets of the Small Charities Coalition, which unfortunately went bust. It dissolved a few months ago. So Ncbo, working with the Foundation for Social Improvement, which is down on the bottom of there, have taken on some of the Small Charities Coalition's resources as well. And again, you can access those free. NAVCA, as we mentioned earlier. Nesta is the National Endowment of Science, Technology and the Arts. They do put out some useful stuff, but again, you know, it depends on whether you fit what they're looking at. Again, Arts Council England. Oh, HLF, I've put the old incarnation there, it should say HF. Heritage Fund, the Association of Independent Museums, Museums Association, and then there's a Museum Development Network as well, if that's the areas that you're looking at. Other funders, I know it's a bit random, but there are so many other funders out there. There's People's Postcode, there's Esme Fairburn, there's Garfield Western. So again, if you go onto 360 Giving, it lists all the funders that they've got, and they're all on there. So you can find all the different funders on there, and then you can go onto their websites to find out what they fund. There's a local government association culture hub, which is in partnership with the Arts Council England. Heritage Alliance have information. I should have changed that Institute of Fundraising to the Chartered Institute of Fundraising, which is what they are now. They have information, and they've got local regional groups as well that talk about fundraising. Cause For and the Arts Fundraising and Philanthropy, which is part of Cause For, do loads of different, they've got resources, they've got information out there. They've also been running programs. They've got a program at the moment called Heritage Compass, where there are resources. And also the other one that I haven't put up there is Rebuilding Heritage. They've got lots of free resources up there as well at the moment, which was part of the Heritage Alliance. It was a program they ran. TNA stands for the National Archives. They have information and resources, as well as provide funding for archive related projects. And the Architectural Heritage Fund, which are specifically a loan funder, but they also do grants and also provide support. And they're looking at organisations that have got assets. So they're looking at heritage-based assets, whether you've got a building that's listed or is of heritage significance. But they do have offices in each region who provide support as well. Foundation for Social Improvement, I've got lots of information, and also the UK Community Foundations, which is where you'll find out where your local community foundation is. I'm now going to shut up. I think that's probably the best thing to do.
What I'll do is before I send all these slides around, I'll expand some of those acronyms and put the links in so that when you come back and look at them, they won't be all Greek to everybody. So that just remains for us to say thank you. And I know we've thrown an awful lot of information at you over these, what's now nearly 2 hours. So thank you for staying on for that extra little bit of time. Are there any questions that anybody has that we've not addressed, or any further information you would like from us while you have us?
Yes, and that referring to with regards to the last slide, the different organizations, I just had an idea. I wonder, does it make sense applying to more than one organization to actually split up the funding? Of course, that they work within, as long as you're hitting the aims and ticking the right boxes naturally, not any old three, but maybe community, heritage, and some other that actually makes sense to bring them all together.
Fran, do you want to?
It's a lot more work to do it that way.
Okay.
It depends how big your project is and how you time it. So if you put in, say for example, if you were to put in 2 applications at the same time, need to make sure or think through the risk that would come with it, so that if you got funding from one but not the other, how would you fund the bit of that project that you haven't secured the funding for? By splitting the project up, are you making it weaker overall? You know, are you diluting your impacts? Or you can play to your strength. So you could have a funder who's particularly keen to fund a particular aspect of your project, and this comes back to developing your relationship with the funder, because you've got such a broad range of people involved in your project by the sounds of it, Harry. It might be worth having those initial conversations saying, should we put in for everything, or are you particularly interested in funding one aspect, or more, is there a particular aspect you're not interested in funding? Because it may be you may have people who want to do the visual arts side but are maybe less keen on the archaeology. You know, they don't always sit well together. It may be that somebody might really see the contrast in that and see that as a strength, but it'd be worth speaking to the funders. But I'd be nervous, because you might be diluting the overall impact. It's going to create more work for you. If you could time it so that you put one in, worked out and knew whether you were going to be successful, and then put in the other half. And if you hadn't been successful in that first one, you could then put, you know, rejig it so you could put more in your second application. So if you could sort of do them consecutively rather than concurrently, I know people who do that.
Yeah.
And that can be quite successful, but be just wary about having two concurrent applications, because you could end up with half of something that then means that you can't deliver everything that you'd wanted to.
I like that the staggered alternative, to actually apportion, then actually up it to actually do something more ambitious or have another outcome.
Yeah,
because it's always great to go to that second funder to say, actually, so and so has already seen how great this project is, and we already have X amount of investment.
Exactly.
What we need is your funding to make this project happen.
Yeah.
So again, you need to be careful that you don't put yourself in a situation where you could deliver your project without that second bit of funding, because they might say, actually, you don't need our funding as much as you did before you got the investment from funder one. So it's a little bit of a balancing act, but I think doing it consecutively would be a better way than doing it concurrently.
Yeah, I would agree. Phase in, if you can, phase it. But the other thing to think about as well is, if you go into more funders, you've then got more work when it comes to monitoring.
Yes, of course.
So more work monitoring and
think about
more huge amounts of guidance to read before you go, because it's two different mindsets.
Yeah,
or you know, applying for two different funders.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Think about that.
Sarah, can I be nosy? Who was your funding from, your successful bid? Who did you apply to?
Arnold Clark.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's really easy. It only took a few minutes to fill it in.
Yeah, it's really good. And it might only be small amounts, but that then you can then start to build on that and develop that. And I think, you know,
I learned a lot this morning. Thank you.
Good. I mean,
I hope it's lots of food for thought. I hope.
Thrown in at the deep end a bit. So.
We will send you all. We will send you the slides and the notes, and Fran will demystify the acronyms that I've put in the final 2 pages. We will also send you the case for support template if you would like that, which gives you ideas on that. And also, we did have some funding information that we had at our last session that we did on funding, which I'm sure we could send out, Fran, which has sort of heritage funders and useful funders, and some other notes from Arts Council, our Arts Council rep as well. But if there's anything else that you've got Fran's email. I don't know if you've got my email. But if there's anything else, obviously the one thing that I would say, and I know that you're not necessarily Sporting Heritage, but I will say, as an independent consultant who works for Sporting Heritage and I've worked with Fran for such a long time, the Sporting Heritage toolkit is unbelievable. It is really, really brilliant. So if you're looking at different areas of organisational development, I pass it on to loads of different organisations, even in the community sector, Sarah. So I pass it on to my guys in Age UK Barnsley, to other community and voluntary groups, because there is things within it that are specific to any organisation, regardless of whether it's art, heritage or community. So and that's courtesy of this lovely lady, Fran, who spent many a day toiling over that.
So I'll also edit this recording, so you'll have a copy of this recording, and I'll also send through the Word document versions of the funding applications for all 3 of the funders that we've looked at today. So unless anybody's got any final questions, I'll bring the session to a close. Thank you so much for your time
Thank
today.
you.
I hope it has been useful, and I wish you every success with your funding applications going forward. So do let us know if you have success.
Yeah, brilliant. Lovely
Thank
to
you
meet
so
you
much.
all. Thank
Have
you,
a great rest
guys.
of your Tuesday. Thanks,
Yeah,
everybody.
It was
Bye.
great. Thank you.
Bye.